The alien commander laughed. Not a small laugh. A full, broadcasted, fleet-wide laugh that every human ship picked up on open channels. Their dreadnoughts were the size of cities. Our scouts were the size of buses. And they laughed. What they didn't know, what no one in the galaxy knew yet, was that we wanted them to laugh. If you love humanity refusing to go down without a fight, hit that like button right now, subscribe to HFY Endurance Tales, and drop a comment telling me, would you have taken that gamble? Because Commander Dale Mercer did, and the universe will never forget what happened next. Strap in, this journey into the dark between stars has only just begun. The war had not started with a declaration. It never did with the hegemony. It started with silence, the kind of silence that swallows entire colonies whole. One day, the mining outpost on Kepler 7 was transmitting routine ore reports and crew status pings. The next day, nothing. No distress call, no stack, no final scream, just a clean, surgical absence where 43,000 human lives used to be. High Command called it an anomaly. They sent a reconnaissance frigate. The frigate never came back either. That was 18 months ago. Now, Commander Dale Mercer stood in the narrow corridor of UES Persistent, a scout-class vessel that was, by any reasonable military standard, an embarrassment. 112 meters from bow to stern, a crew of 61. Engines good enough to outrun trouble if trouble didn't notice you first. Weapons rated for defensive use only, which, in practice, meant they were rated for making you feel better about dying. Dale was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with grays starting to push through the brown at his temples. He had the kind of face that had seen too many briefings go wrong, and learned to stop flinching. His hands were steady. His voice was quiet. His crew trusted him the way soldiers trust a man who has never once lied to them about how bad things are. And right now, things were very bad. "Put it on the main display," he said. Lieutenant Aaron Sachs, the ship's communications officer, pulled up the intercept on the forward display. The alien signal had been decoded 12 hours ago by the fleet's linguistics team. The translation was imperfect. It always was with hegemony broadcasts, but the meaning was clear enough to turn stomachs. "The small ones run again. Let them. We will collect the wreckage when the burning is done." There was laughter embedded in the audio, not metaphorical, actual laughter. A sound like tearing metal, and deep, resonant clicks. The hegemony had broadcast their amusement to every one of their ships simultaneously. They wanted humanity to hear it. They wanted us to know how little they thought of us. "How many of their ships are we tracking?" Dale asked. Chief Tactical Officer Ryan Holt pulled up the sensor overlay. "Confirmed 61 dreadnoughts, sir. Probable count is closer to 70. They're running in formation. Standard hegemony wedge. Lead ships are in the Bravo 9 corridor. At their current speed, they'll be in effective range of Relay Station Fortis in about 9 hours. Relay Station Fortis wasn't just a communications hub. It was the last significant human installation between the hegemony fleet and the inner colonies. 30,000 people lived and worked on that station. Families, engineers, children born in zero gravity who had never once touched Earth's soil. Dale looked at the formation on the overlay for a long moment. "How many scout ships do we have in this sector?" 14, sir, including us. 14 scouts against 60-plus dreadnoughts. The numbers didn't just look bad, they looked like a punchline. Which was, Dale supposed, exactly what the hegemony thought they were. "Get me Admiral Thomas Walsh on a secured line." It took 6 minutes for the connection to stabilize. The hegemony's signal jamming was getting stronger as their fleet advanced. When Walsh appeared, he was standing, which meant he hadn't slept. Dale hadn't expected him to have slept. "Mercer." Walsh's voice was controlled, tight. "You've seen the intercepts?" "Yes, sir." "Then you know what they think of our scout formations." "I do, sir." Walsh looked at him for a moment, the look of a man about to say something that couldn't be unsaid. "Project Tether is ready. Dr. Samuel Voss confirmed final calibration 2 hours ago. The anchors are live." Dale felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, something colder and more deliberate than fear. "You want to use them now. I want to use them right. The hegemony fleet needs to be inside the Delphi corridor when the anchors go active. If even a third of their ships are outside the boundary, We lose the gravitational envelope and the whole thing falls apart. Walsh leaned forward. I need them fully committed, Dale. All of them. I need them so sure they've already won that they stop thinking. And to get them fully committed, Dale said slowly, someone needs to make them angry enough to stop being careful. 14 scout ships running scared through an asteroid belt, Walsh said. That's what angry looks like to the hegemony. That's the bait. The silence between them lasted exactly 3 seconds. We'll need to be fast, Dale said. You'll need to be perfect, Walsh replied. Because if they catch even one of your ships before they cross the Delphi threshold, they might slow down. And if they slow down, the window closes. And if the window closes, Fortis burns. I understand, sir. Walsh nodded once. Good hunting, Commander. The line dropped. Dale turned back to his crew. 61 people. Small ship. Impossible odds. He pulled up the navigational chart for the Bravo 9 corridor and the Delphi sector beyond it, tracing the asteroid belt with one finger. He could already see the route. The shape of it. The beautiful, terrifying logic of running directly at the largest fleet humanity had ever faced, and trusting that arrogance would do the rest. He pressed the shipwide comm. All hands. This is Commander Mercer. What I'm about to ask you to do is going to look from the outside like the most suicidal order in the history of the United Earth Navy. He paused. It isn't. But the hegemony needs to believe it is. We are going to run, and we are going to make sure they chase us. And we are going to make sure they laugh the entire way. Another pause. Because the last thing the hegemony is ever going to do in this galaxy is laugh. In the communications bay, Aaron Sachs quietly set down his coffee and pulled up his station. Ryan Holt began running targeting calculations for a battle they weren't supposed to survive. 14 scout ships arranged themselves in the most vulnerable-looking formation Dale could design. And somewhere in the dark, 61 dreadnoughts turned their bows toward the running lights of the smallest fleet humanity had ever fielded, and began to accelerate. They were so sure this would be easy. That was the first mistake they would never get the chance to correct. The asteroid belt, designated Delta Kappa 7 on human charts, had no poetic name. It was simply a graveyard of rock and frozen gas left over from a planetary collision that happened before humanity learned to write. The rocks ranged from pebbles to mountains, tumbling in slow, unpredictable orbits, close enough together in sections that navigating them at speed required either exceptional piloting or exceptional stupidity. Dale had 14 pilots. Every one of them was exceptional. Scout formation, spread to pattern Whiskey 4, Dale ordered. Maximum visual separation. I want the hegemony, seeing 14 separate heat signatures spread across a 60-kilometer front. Look scared. Look disorganized. Sir, said Ensign Carter Blake at the helm. We are scared. Then look it authentically, Dale said. Just keep your spacing. The 14 ships fanned out, their engine trails painting streaks of blue-white across the dark. Behind them, the hegemony fleet was advancing in its great wedge. 61 confirmed dreadnoughts, each one between 8 and 12 kilometers long. The lead ship alone massed more than the entire human fleet combined. Its hull plating was designed to absorb direct nuclear strikes without structural compromise. Its primary weapons array could reduce a moon to slag in under 40 minutes, and it was chasing 14 school buses through a rock field. Dale watched the sensor feed with the quiet focus of a man doing math in his head. The hegemony fleet was fast, faster than their size suggested, which was one of the more unsettling facts about them. But the asteroid belt was slowing them down. Not because the rocks threatened their armor. Rocks that size hitting a hegemony dreadnought was like throwing gravel at a tank. But the belt was dense enough that close formation was tactically risky even for them. They were spreading out slightly, maintaining their wedge, but adjusting spacing. That was exactly what Dale needed. Ryan, he said, what's their current spread? Lead elements are 40 kilometers wide, sir. Trailing elements stretching back about 90 kilometers. They're staying in formation discipline, but the asteroid avoidance is making them looser than they want to be. Good. Are they still broadcasting? Aaron checked his console. Yes, sir. Fleet-wide. Translating now. He read carefully. The small ones scatter like debris. Their terror is adequate. Continue acceleration. The station falls before their day cycle ends. They're talking about Fortis, Carter said quietly from the helm. "Keep your eyes on the rocks, Blake," Dale said. The plan was elegant in the way that genuinely dangerous things often are. The Delphi corridor, the gravitational dead zone, where Dr. Voss's gravity anchors had been positioned, was 3 hours ahead at current speed. But the hegemony couldn't know what waited there. The corridor looked like nothing on standard sensors. A stretch of relatively open space between the asteroid belt and the outer marker of the Fortis defense perimeter. Empty, inviting, the natural path of least resistance for a fleet moving at speed. The gravity anchors themselves were the product of 11 years of classified research, 3 congressional budget battles, and one very stubborn physicist who had told the military brass with complete calm that he could weaponize a singularity if they would stop asking him to explain it in meetings. Dr. Samuel Voss was 58 years old and had the social skills of a man who had spent most of his adult life talking to equations instead of people. But he had been right. The anchors were not weapons in the traditional sense. They did not fire. They did not explode. They simply reached. Each anchor was a focused gravity emitter, capable of interfacing with the residual tidal influence of the dormant microsingularity that sat at the heart of the Delphi corridor, like a sleeping nerve. Alone, each anchor was powerful enough to slow a single large vessel. But linked to each other and to the singularity, they created something the physics community had argued was theoretically impossible, until Voss stopped arguing and started building. A localized gravity well. Scalable by mass, the bigger the object inside the field, the stronger the pull. Dale had read the technical briefing 3 times. He understood the principle. What kept him up at night wasn't whether it would work. Voss said it would work. What kept Dale up was the margin. The anchors needed a minimum of 40 dreadnoughts inside the Delphi boundary to generate enough gravitational feedback to lock the fleet. Fewer than 40, and the field would be strong but not overwhelming. The hegemony ships might slow, might take damage, but they could still fight, could still fire, could still reach Fortis. 40 was the number. Every ship matters. "Sir," Ryan said sharply. "Lead hegemony elements are increasing speed. They're pushing through the belt faster than projected." Dale looked at the numbers. The enemy was running ahead of schedule. Not enough to change the geometry of the trap, but enough to apply pressure. Distance to Delphi threshold. At their current speed, they'll cross it in 2 hours 40 minutes, sir. And our scouts? We're pacing them, but if they push any harder through the belt, we're going to start losing the visual separation that's keeping them committed. If they think we're splitting up, they might detach a pursuit element instead of committing the full fleet. That was the variable Dale had lost sleep over. The hegemony didn't need to bring everything. 40 dreadnoughts would casually destroy Fortis. They only needed a fraction of their fleet to accomplish their objective. The trick was making them want to bring all of it, making the kill feel important enough to use their full strength. "Aaron," Dale said, "open a channel, unencrypted, hegemony accessible frequency." Aaron's eyebrows went up. "Sir, do it." The channel opened. Dale leaned toward the comm with complete composure. "All scout units, this is Commander Mercer. Disperse to emergency pattern. Repeat, emergency dispersal. Fall back to Fortis defense perimeter. Fortis, this is UES persistent. We are being overrun. Request immediate reinforcement. Repeat, we are being overrun." He clicked the channel closed. Ryan stared at him. "Sir, that transmission just told them exactly where we're running." "Yes," Dale said. "It also told them we're panicking. And it told them Fortis is asking for help it isn't going to get." He watched the sensor feed. "Give it 30 seconds. 22 seconds later, the hegemony fleet increased speed again. And this time, the entire wedge accelerated together. All 61 dreadnoughts, fully committed, pushing hard through the asteroid belt, closing the distance, certain they were running down a broken enemy, fleeing toward a station that couldn't save them. Ryan exhaled slowly. They took the bait. They were always going to take the bait, Dale said. They stopped thinking the moment they started laughing. He looked at the countdown timer he'd set in the corner of his display. 2 hours and 12 minutes to the Delphi threshold. All scout units maintain current heading. Keep them behind us. Keep them fast. And whatever happens, do not let a single one of those ships peel off. Because somewhere ahead, in the dark of the Delphi corridor, Dr. Samuel Voss was watching a different set of numbers. And he was waiting for 61 reasons to press a button. Dr. Samuel Voss did not look like a man who had just built the most powerful weapon in human history. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days and was running on coffee and the specific kind of focus that comes when you've spent your entire career telling people something is possible and are finally about to prove it. He sat at a console aboard the UES Foundation, a heavy research vessel, stationed at the far edge of the Delphi corridor. Surrounded by screens showing gravitational flux readings, anchor status indicators, and a single tactical overlay showing the positions of both the human scouts and the hegemony fleet. His assistant, technician Marcus Webb, had stopped talking to him 3 hours ago after Voss had answered 3 separate questions with variations of, "Yes, that's fine, stop asking me." Webb didn't take it personally. He'd worked with Voss for 6 years. "Anchor array status," Voss said to no one in particular, and to Webb specifically. "All 12 anchors nominal, sir. Gravitational coupling to the singularity is holding at 93% efficiency. We're inside the projected optimal range." 93 is fine, Voss said. 90 was the threshold. 93 is fine. "You've said that 4 times, sir. Because I keep checking, and it keeps being 93. He pulled up the mass calculation on his secondary display. The hegemony fleet's combined tonnage, extrapolated from signal intelligence and prior engagement data, was a number so large, it had required Voss to add a column to his spreadsheet. "When they cross the outer boundary marker, I need real-time mass confirmation from the fleet sensors. The field scales with mass. If the number is off by more than 8%, I'll need to adjust Anchor 4's output manually." "Understood, sir." Voss sat back and rubbed his face. He was not a military man. He had never fired a weapon. He had spent his career at universities and in laboratories, arguing with people who thought gravity was a solved problem. It wasn't a solved problem. Gravity was a language the universe spoke that nobody had fully translated yet. Voss had just learned enough of it to use it. What he was about to do, what the anchors were going to do, was not an explosion. It would not look like a battle, not at first. It would look like a traffic jam. 61 of the most advanced warships in the known galaxy, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust, simply stopping. Against their will, against their engines, against everything their commanders would scream at their crews to do. And then the tidal forces would begin. Voss understood tidal forces the way musicians understand rhythm. Not just intellectually, but in the bones. The gravity anchors didn't pull uniformly, they pulled differentially. The bow of a dreadnought would experience slightly more coal than the stern, the port side slightly more than starboard. In a natural gravity well, a ship's structural engineers accounted for this. They built compensation into every frame, every joint. But the hegemony ships had been engineered for combat stress, for weapons impacts, for acceleration and maneuver. Not for being stretched. "Webb," Voss said, "when the field activates, what's the structural tolerance window for a standard hegemony dreadnought?" Webb pulled up the analysis. Based on materials intelligence from salvage of the Kepler 7 wreckage, estimated tolerance before frame stress becomes critical is approximately 11 minutes at full anchor output. And at reduced output? Longer, obviously. But the fleet would have time to react, time to attempt escape vectors. Some ships might break free. "Then we don't use reduced output," Voss said simply. He looked at the tactical overlay. The human scouts were threading through the last section of the asteroid belt, staying just far enough ahead of the hegemony fleet to keep them committed, without being close enough to draw weapons fire. Dale Mercer was doing something extraordinarily difficult, and making it look like panic, which was its own kind of art. Voss had met Mercer once, at a high command briefing. He'd seemed like a man who was good at doing the right thing at the right time, which was rarer than it sounded. "Commander Mercer's formation is holding," Webb said. "Lead hegemony elements are 40 minutes from the outer boundary." 40 minutes. Voss picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. The hegemony had been a galactic power through 3 centuries before humanity left their home system. They had absorbed or destroyed 11 spacefaring civilizations, not through negotiation, not through coexistence, through the straightforward application of mass and firepower, repeated until nothing remained to resist them. They had never encountered a civilization that outgunned them, so they had built their entire strategic doctrine around the assumption that no civilization ever would. They had never fought something that turned their size against them. They weren't about to. 30 minutes to boundary, Webb reported. The scout ships were clear of the asteroid belt now, running into the open space of the Delphi corridor. On the tactical overlay, Voss could see the hegemony fleet accelerating further. The open space gave them room to push their engines, and they were taking it. They were confident. They were fast. They were enormous. 20 minutes. Dale Mercer's voice came over the command channel, quiet and precise. Dr. Voss, scout formation is in position. All 14 ships are inside the safe zone. We are clear. Confirmed, Commander, Voss replied. Stand by. Standing by. The hegemony fleet crossed the outer boundary marker at a speed that made Webb's instruments spike briefly, before they adjusted. 61 dreadnoughts, their combined mass registering on the gravitational sensors like a small moon moving through the corridor. Voss stared at the number. It was not off by 8%. It was not off at all. Anchor array, he said. Final status. Nominal across all 12, sir. Singularity coupling at 94%. Voss nodded once. He pulled up the activation control. A single interface. Clean. No ceremony. He had always believed that genuinely important moments should feel quiet. He looked at the tactical overlay one last time. 61 ships, millions of tons of steel and weaponry, and absolute certainty that humanity was finished. Webb, he said, record the timestamp. Recording, sir. Samuel Voss pressed the activation control, and the universe bent. Not visibly, not with light or sound, but on the gravitational sensors, the readings spiked from baseline to a number that had previously existed only in theoretical models, and the hegemony fleet, which had been accelerating toward Fortis at battle speed, did something it had never done in 3 centuries of warfare. It stopped. Not slowed, not staggered. Stopped. All 61 ships simultaneously, as if the fabric of space itself had reached up and grabbed them by the hull. For approximately 4 seconds, there was silence on every channel. The scream was not metaphorical. It came through on every frequency simultaneously. Hegemony military channels, emergency broadcasts, open comms. It was the sound of 61 bridge crews realizing at exactly the same moment that their engines, their weapons, their centuries of tactical doctrine, and their deeply held belief in their own invincibility had just become completely irrelevant. Dale listened to it from the bridge of the Persistent and felt nothing except a cold, focused clarity. Ryan, he said, give me the field status. Anchor array is fully engaged, sir. All 61 hegemony vessels confirmed inside the gravitational boundary. Field strength is reading at 108% of projected output. The mass is actually higher than our estimates. The anchors are scaling up automatically. Ryan looked up from his console. Sir, they can't move. Their engines are at full burn, and they are not moving. How long until structural stress becomes critical? At current field intensity, Dr. Voss says 9 to 11 minutes for the first wave of hull failures. 9 minutes. Dale pulled up the visual feed from the scout ship's long-range sensors. The hegemony fleet was visible, just barely, as a cluster of massive shapes frozen in the dark. Their engine trails were blazing at full power, the equivalent of 61 city-sized machines screaming at maximum output, and they were going nowhere. The contrast between the force being applied and the complete absence of movement was almost surreal. Almost. Aaron, are they hailing us? Every channel available to them, sir. Multiple commanders, multiple ships. Translation is messy. A lot of it is orders being shouted internally, but the directed transmissions toward our formation are. Aaron paused. Their demands, sir. Ordering us to deactivate whatever we've done. Promising terms, threatening consequences. What kind of terms? Survival, for some of us. Dale thought about Kepler-7, about 43,000 people who hadn't received terms. No response, he said. Yes, sir. The hegemony ships were beginning to move now, but not forward. The differential pull of the gravity field was doing what Voss had predicted. Ships were rotating slowly, involuntarily, as the tidal forces gripped different sections of their hulls with different intensities. A dreadnought on the outer edge of the formation was rotating almost 30 degrees off its original heading, its engines burning sideways against the pull with a kind of desperate futility. On the bridge of the Persistent, Carter Blake was watching the sensor feed with the expression of someone who had been told something was going to happen and still couldn't quite believe it was happening. "Sir," he said, "they're trying to coordinate. The lead ship is transmitting fleet-wide. Looks like a coordinated engine burn attempt. If they all fire on the same vector simultaneously, they'll generate enough combined thrust to potentially break the outer ships free of the boundary," Dale said. He'd read Voss's briefing notes. This was the contingency. "How long until they're synchronized for the burn attempt?" "Estimating 4 minutes." Dale pressed the command channel. "Dr. Voss." "I see it," Voss said. His voice was calm in the specific way of someone who has already done the math. "Coordinated burn won't work. The anchor array adjusts for vector thrust automatically. The more force they apply in a single direction, the more the field compensates in that direction. It's self-correcting." A brief pause. "Tell your people to stay clear of the outer boundary. When the hull failures begin, debris vectors will be unpredictable." "Understood." Dale turned to his crew. "All scout ships fall back to 200 kilometers from the boundary edge. Maintain sensor coverage, but clear the debris corridor." On the tactical overlay, the hegemony formation was beginning to look less like a fleet and more like a debris field in slow motion. Ships rotating, drifting laterally, against the pull. Engine flares describing frantic arcs as commanders tried maneuvers that had no logical basis in the physics of what was happening to them. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after Voss activated the field, the first hull failure occurred. It wasn't dramatic. Not at first. A fracture line opened along the midsection of a dreadnought on the formation's right flank, a ship designated in human tactical systems as Hegemony Vessel Bravo 7. The fracture ran along a structural junction where two sections of the hull met at 90 degrees, a geometry that the tidal differential particularly disliked. Internal pressure vented through the fracture in a brief flash of light, and Bravo 7's rotation, which had been slow and involuntary, suddenly became fast and uncontrolled. "Bravo 7 is breaking up," Ryan reported, his voice carefully neutral. "Structural cascade in progress." On the feed, it looked like a mountain coming apart. Slowly at first, then all at once. Sections of the dreadnought separating with the terrible, inevitable logic of things that have exceeded their design tolerances. The vessel had been built to withstand weapons fire that could crack stone. It had never been built for this. The debris spread outward from the fracture point in a widening cloud. Some pieces were the size of houses, some were the size of city blocks. "That's one," Carter said, very quietly. "Eyes on the rest," Dale said. The coordinated burn attempt came 90 seconds later. Every remaining hegemony ship fired simultaneously on a vector aimed at the nearest boundary edge, a massive, synchronized application of force that briefly overloaded Ryan's sensor display with engine output readings. The field held, more than held. Voss's self-correcting mechanism responded with a localized surge of intensity along the vector of the burn, and the result was that the ships closest to the boundary were suddenly experiencing stronger tidal forces than before. 2 more hull failures in rapid succession. Vessels on the outer edge of the formation, already under the most stress, coming apart at their structural weak points. 3 dreadnoughts down, 58 remaining. The hegemony commanders were now doing the only thing left to them, broadcasting on every frequency, at maximum power, hoping that someone somewhere was listening and would understand what was happening. Several transmissions were directed outward, away from the corridor, calls to whatever hegemony forces might be beyond sensor range. "Aaron," Dale said, "are they getting a signal out?" "Trying to, sir. The gravity field is causing significant interference with their long-range transmission capabilities. They're getting fragments through. Not enough for a coherent message." Aaron listened to his earpiece. "One transmission is partial, translates approximately as, 'The humans have found a way to use the deep forces. Do not pursue into open space. Do not.'" He stopped. "That ship is Bravo 14, sir. It just lost structural integrity. 57 remaining." Dale stared at the tactical overlay. The hegemony fleet, the most powerful military force humanity had ever faced, was dying in the dark, not from weapons fire, not from a battle of speed, or firepower, or courage, but from physics, from the elegant, merciless application of forces they had never needed to account for, because nothing had ever stood up to them long enough to think this carefully. He felt something then, not satisfaction, not exactly, something more complicated than that. "Ryan," he said, Time to complete structural failure across the formation. At current rate of cascade, 6 to 8 minutes for the remaining ships. The field is self-sustaining at this point. The debris from the failed ships is adding mass to the gravitational calculation. Ryan looked up. Sir, the anchors aren't going to need to run at full power much longer. The field is feeding itself. Dale nodded slowly. Somewhere in the dark ahead of him, 61 ships that had come to end humanity were ending themselves. And the worst part, the part Dale would think about for years, was that they still didn't fully understand why. He looked at the sensor feed. 57 remaining. The cascade was accelerating. And from the heart of the hegemony fleet, one final transmission broke through the interference. A single voice, calm now. The anger and the demands were gone. What was left sounded almost like something human. How? Dale reached for the comm. He held it for a moment. You asked the wrong question, Dale said. His voice went out on the open channel, unencrypted, unfiltered, broadcast to every ship in the hegemony fleet that still had a functioning receiver, which, at that point, was most of them. They couldn't move, they couldn't fight, but they could still hear. You asked how we did this, but the question you should have been asking, the one that would have saved you, was why we built ships this small. He paused. We didn't build them small because we couldn't build them bigger. We built them small because we were waiting. Because we knew that the only way to beat something that outweighs you is to make its weight the weapon. There was no response from the hegemony fleet. Only the sounds of structural groaning, the intermittent crack of hull plating, the distant percussion of things that weighed millions of tons, breaking under forces they were never designed to face. Ryan, Dale said. Status. 44 remaining intact, sir. Cascade is accelerating. The gravitational feedback loop is fully established. The debris mass from the failed ships is increasing field intensity. Each loss makes the next one faster. Ryan's voice was precise and steady, the voice of a professional doing his job. We're looking at full formation collapse in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Dale had done a lot of things in his military career that he would not describe as comfortable. He had ordered retreats. He had watched ships take hits. He had read casualty reports and signed letters to families, and sat in the particular silence that follows a battle where the numbers in the win column don't feel as clean as they looked in the briefing. What he was watching now was different. There was no enemy fire, no exchange, just physics, doing what physics does when you set it up correctly and step back. 44 ships, then 41, then 37. They were going fast now. Sir, Aaron said, I'm picking up fragments of internal communications from several ships. Translation is incomplete, but they're not battle comms anymore. He stopped, saying Aaron. They're evacuation calls, sir. They're trying to get crews off the ships. Dale looked at the tactical overlay. The hegemony escape pods, if they had them in the same configuration as the wreckage from Kepler 7 suggested, would be launched from the dorsal sections of the hull. Smaller than scout ships. Probably capable of surviving outside the gravitational boundary if they could clear the field edge before the debris density made navigation impossible. He made a decision in approximately 2 seconds. Ryan, is there an escape pod launch window on the field edge? A corridor where the debris density is low enough for small craft to get through? Ryan checked. Possibly, sir. Northern edge of the boundary. Debris concentration is lower there. The failed ships were mostly on the southern and eastern flanks. A small craft moving at high speed might make it. Aaron, broadcast on all hegemony frequencies. Translation to best approximation. Dale thought carefully. Tell them, northern boundary edge, minimum safe corridor for small craft. Tell them we are not targeting evacuation pods. Aaron looked at him for a moment. Then he translated in broadcast. On the sensor feed, the first hegemony escape pods launched approximately 40 seconds later. Small, fast objects. Much smaller than any human fighter craft. The hegemony's emergency vessels were efficient, in the way their warships were not. Built for speed rather than comfort. They crossed the northern boundary corridor in a cluster, moving faster than Dale would have thought possible for cold-launched emergency craft. They cleared the boundary. They kept moving, away from the corridor, away from the human fleet, into the dark. Dale watched them go, and said nothing. 23 ships remaining in the field. Then, 14. The acceleration of the cascade was visible now, even without the sensor overlay. The Delphi corridor, which had been empty dark space an hour ago, was lit by the structural failures of the largest fleet humanity had ever faced. Not the bright instantaneous light of weapons fire, the slower, uglier light of things breaking at their foundations. "Sir," Webb's voice came over the command link from the Foundation. "Dr. Voss wants you to know the singularity coupling is holding at stable parameters. The field will self-maintain until the mass inside the boundary drops below the minimum threshold. That will happen when there's nothing left to hold," Dale finished. "Yes, sir." 8 ships, then 5. Commander Dale Mercer watched the last 5 hegemony dreadnoughts die from a distance of 200 kilometers, and he thought about a lot of things that he didn't say out loud. He thought about Kepler 7, about 43,000 people who had no warning and no gravity anchors and no Commander Mercer doing math about bait and thresholds. He thought about Fortis, still broadcasting status pings 30 million kilometers away, its 30,000 residents unaware of how close the calculus had come to failing. He thought about 14 scout ships that had run towards 61 dreadnoughts on purpose, trusting that arrogance would do what arrogance always does when it stops paying attention. He thought about the voice that had asked how. The last ship, hegemony vessel designation Alpha 1, which had been the lead dreadnought, the one from whose bridge the mocking laughter had first been broadcast, lasted 40 seconds longer than the others. Whether by superior construction or superior luck, it held together through the final surge of the gravitational cascade, while everything around it had already collapsed. Then, it didn't. The sensor feed registered 0 intact hegemony vessels at 14:37:09 station time. No one on the bridge of the Persistent said anything for a moment. He was 26 years old, had been flying scout ships for 3 years, and would spend the rest of his life being asked what it was like to be there. What he said, in the quiet of that moment was, "Sir, is it over?" Dale looked at the tactical overlay. The Delphi corridor, the debris field that had been a fleet, the 14 scout ships arranged in a loose formation at the boundary edge, their hulls intact, their crews breathing. "The battle," Dale said, "is over." He pressed the command channel. "Dr. Voss, stand down the anchor array." "Standing down," Voss said. His voice was strange, not emotional exactly, but carrying a weight that technical language couldn't quite contain. "Field deactivating. Singularity coupling releasing to ambient parameters." A pause. "Commander, the system performed within nominal projections across all variables." "I know," Dale said. "You did good work, Sam." Another pause, longer. "Thank you, Commander." Dale closed the channel and looked at his crew. Ryan Holt was running post-engagement sensor sweeps with the focused efficiency of a man who processed things by staying busy. Aaron Sachs was logging the final transmission records with careful, deliberate keystrokes. Carter Blake had both hands on the helm that hadn't needed to maneuver in 40 minutes and was staring at the display with an expression that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite relief. "All hands," Dale said, on the ship-wide comm. "This is Commander Mercer. The engagement is complete. All friendly vessels are intact. Fortis Station is safe." He paused. "Stand down from battle stations. Get some food. Get some rest. You earned it." He clicked off the comm. In the dark outside, the debris field of what had been the hegemony's primary assault fleet was beginning its slow spread through the Delphi corridor. A graveyard of the largest warships in the known galaxy, pinned and broken not by superior firepower, but by the patient application of physics and the willingness to look small until it mattered. On the northern edge of the corridor, a cluster of small, fast objects was still moving outward into the dark. Dale watched their sensor returns for a long moment. Then, he turned away. Because the battle was over. But the war, the real one, the one fought in councils and communications and the long, slow renegotiation of who feared whom in the galaxy, that was just beginning. The debrief took 11 days. Not because the facts were complicated. They weren't. The engagement record was clean, the anchor array data was complete, and the sensor logs from all 14 scout ships provided a documentation of the battle so thorough that the High Command Review Board had, at one point, simply stopped the presentation and sat in silence for several minutes. What took 11 days was everything else. The political weight of what had happened in the Delphi corridor did not arrive all at once. It came in waves, the way significant things do, first as raw data, then as analysis, then as the slow, uncomfortable realization of what the data and the analysis actually meant for the shape of the future. The hegemony had lost its primary assault fleet, not damaged, not retreated, lost, consumed by physics, down to the last ship. The escape pods that had cleared the northern boundary, 41 of them, carrying approximately 800 survivors out of a fleet crew complement estimated at over 300,000, had scattered into deep space on divergent vectors. The Foundation's long-range sensors tracked them until they exceeded range. None turned back, none attempted communication. They were going home, carrying a story that no one in the hegemony had ever had to carry before. Admiral Walsh had called Dale on the third day of the debrief. Not an official channel, a personal line. "You let the pods go," he said. "Yes, sir. High Command is going to ask about that." "I know, sir." Walsh was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to tell them?" Dale had thought about this. He had thought about it from the moment he watched the first pod clear the boundary, and he had kept thinking about it through the long, slow debrief days, and he had arrived at an answer that he believed was right not because it was comfortable, but because it was true. Tell them that a civilization that destroys every witness produces enemies who have nothing left to lose. Tell them that 800 survivors going home with a story about gravity anchors is more effective deterrence than 800 corpses that nobody finds. He paused. "And tell them that I made the call and I'll defend it." Walsh said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's what I'll tell them." The High Command Review Board accepted the decision without formal objection. Whether this was because they agreed with the reasoning or because the outcome made argument difficult, Dale never found out. Dr. Samuel Voss appeared at the debrief on day 4, looking significantly better than he had on the Foundation. He had apparently slept for 16 hours straight after the engagement, and then eaten what the debrief staff described as an alarming amount of food. He presented the technical data on the anchor array with the focused precision of a man in his element, answering questions without condescension and deflecting credit with the particular awkwardness of someone who had genuinely not thought about recognition until it was being offered. At the end of his presentation, he was asked by a high command senior officer whether the gravity anchor system could be scaled further, whether more singularities could be coupled, whether the field could be made larger. Voss considered this for a moment. "The physics supports scaling," he said. "The question is whether we should scale before we understand the full implications. A weapon that uses mass as a multiplier becomes more powerful the larger your opponent is. That's useful now. In 20 years, when we're the largest power in the sector, it becomes a different kind of calculation." The room was quiet. "Build more anchors," Voss said. "But think carefully about what you're building them for." That answer was not in the official debrief record. But Dale was there, and he remembered it. On the 8th day of the debrief, a hegemony diplomatic signal was detected at the outer edge of human-monitored space. Not a military frequency. A channel that the xenolinguistics team identified as associated, historically, with hegemony political communication. The kind of signals sent before meetings, not before battles. The hegemony did not have a cultural framework for surrender, as far as anyone could determine. It was, as best as the translation team could render it, a request for terms of continued existence. The difference was significant, and everyone in the room understood it. Admiral Walsh looked at Dale across the conference table. Dale looked back. "That," Walsh said quietly, "is new." It was new. 3 centuries of hegemony expansion had never produced that signal. 11 civilizations absorbed or destroyed, and none of them had ever caused the hegemony to send a signal asking how things might continue, rather than demanding that they end. 800 survivors, carrying a story home, physics as a weapon, small ships making large ships into their own worst enemy. It wasn't the end of anything. Dale knew that. The galaxy was vast and political and full of powers that hadn't been watching the Delphi corridor, and hadn't yet learned what happened when you laughed at humanity's fleet. There would be others. There would always be others. But the hegemony had learned. And others would hear the story. And the story would travel the way stories do in political spaces, faster than ships, further than signals, arriving in places before anyone had time to prepare a response. On the 11th day, Dale Mercer stood on the observation deck of Relay Station Fortis and watched the stars. 30,000 people lived on this station. Families, engineers, a population that had gone to sleep on what might have been their last night, and woken up not knowing that 14 scout ships had stood between them and 61 dreadnoughts, and that a physicist who hadn't slept in 4 days had pressed a button and changed the direction of the war. Most of them would never know the details. The engagement was classified at a level that would remain sealed for years. What they would know, eventually, when the diplomatic signals resolved into something official, was that the hegemony had stopped advancing. That the sector was, for the moment, quiet. That would be enough. It had to be. Carter Blake found him on the observation deck. Which wasn't surprising. Carter had a habit of going where the view was good, when he needed to think. "Sir," Carter said, "I've been thinking about what you said on the bridge. About the battle being over." "What about it?" "You said the battle is over, not the war." Dale looked at the stars. Thousands of them, visible through the Fortis observation deck's composite panels. Each one a system with its own geometry, its own politics, its own calculation of who was strong and who was weak, and who had just demonstrated that those two things weren't as simple as they used to be. "The war changed shape," Dale said. "It doesn't end, but how it gets fought, who's afraid of whom, what weapons mean, what it costs to underestimate something, that changed. What happened in Delphi will echo for a long time." Carter thought about this. "Is that a good thing?" "I don't know yet," Dale said honestly. "Ask me in 20 years. Carter nodded slowly. He stood there for a while, watching the same stars, thinking whatever a 26-year-old pilot thinks when he has watched the largest fleet in the galaxy collapse into debris around him and come out the other side with his hull intact. Then he said, "I would have liked to have seen their faces when the ships stopped moving." Dale almost smiled. "No," he said, "you wouldn't have." And Carter after a moment understood what he meant, and didn't say anything else. The stars were quiet. Fortis hummed around them, the ordinary continuous sound of 30,000 lives going about their business, making coffee and filing reports and arguing about schedules and doing the 10,000 unremarkable things that people do when they're not thinking about how close the margin was. Dale thought about the Persistent, currently in dry dock for post-engagement inspection. 112 meters. 61 crew members. Small enough that the hegemony had laughed at it. He thought about what small really means when you've thought carefully about the physics. Then he turned away from the stars and went back to work. Because in the galaxy that existed after the Delphi corridor, humanity wasn't the underdog anymore. And that was going to require a completely different kind of thinking. The kind that started now. If this story hit different, if you felt that moment when 61 dreadnoughts went still, drop a comment below and tell us which part got you. Share this with someone who loves a good humanity win. And if you're new to HFY Endurance Tales, subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here, and there are more where this came from. The galaxy is watching.